My name is Meredith Frost and I'm 34 years old. The Father's Day reunion was held at my parents' backyard in Ohio. The same yard where every family gathering had happened since I was a kid. The same long wooden table dragged out from the garage and covered with a checkered cloth that smelled like sunscreen and barbecue smoke. I had driven 3 hours that morning with a card in my purse and a small gift for my father, a watch I'd saved up for over 2 months because his old one had stopped working back in March. I wanted that day to be normal. I wanted for once to sit at that table and just be one of his kids. There were maybe 20 people scattered across the yard when I arrived and setting out potato salad. My brother Wesley flipping burgers on the grill. My mother fussing over a tablecloth that kept blowing up in the wind. My father sat at the head of the table in his usual lawn chair, a beer sweating in his hand, laughing at something my uncle had said. I walked up, kissed his cheek, told him Happy Father's Day, and took the seat my mother pointed me toward, right across from him, sandwiched between my cousin Talia and my sister-in-law. For the first 20 minutes, everything felt fine. We ate. We talked about the heat. Somebody's kid ran through the sprinkler and got yelled at for getting the cooler wet. Then my uncle raised his glass and asked my father to say a few words, the way he did every year. Something about being thankful for his children. My father stood up slowly, glass in hand, and looked around the table at each of his kids one by one. He started with Wesley, talking about how proud he was that Wesley had taken over the family hardware store. Then my younger sister, how she'd just gotten engaged and how happy that made him. Then he looked at me. He didn't say my name first. He said, "I'm proud of all my children." He paused long enough that a few people actually smiled, thinking something kind was coming. Then he kept going. Except the disgrace sitting at this table. The yard went quiet so fast I could hear the sprinkler still running somewhere behind the house. He wasn't joking. His face was flat, almost bored, like he was stating a fact he'd repeated to himself 100 times before he ever said it out loud. I felt my face go hot. Felt every set of eyes at that table land on me at once. And for a few seconds, nobody moved. Nobody defended me. Not my mother, who suddenly found something fascinating in her napkin. Not Wesley, who stared down at his plate like it had personally wronged him. Not my aunts, not my uncles. Not even Talia sitting right next to me, who just went still, the way people do when they've decided silence is safer than honesty. 20 people, and not one of them said a word. I sat there with my fork halfway to my mouth, the same fork I'd been using to eat the potato salad I'd helped my mother make the night before, and I understood fully and completely that this wasn't the first time he'd thought it. It was just the first time he'd said it where everyone could hear. I could have screamed. I could have stood up and asked him exactly what I had done to earn that word in front of his brothers, his grandchildren, the neighbors whose fence was close enough that I knew they could hear every bit of it, too. Instead, something in me went very calm. The kind of calm that doesn't feel like peace so much as a door quietly closing. I reached into my purse, pulled out the envelope I'd brought for him, the one with the watch receipt folded inside along with a card I'd written 2 nights earlier, and I set it gently on the table in front of his plate. I smiled at him, a real smile, not a forced one, because somewhere in that moment, I had already let go of needing him to see me differently. I told him, "Happy Father's Day." My voice steady, even pleasant. Then I stood up, pushed my chair in so it wouldn't scrape against the patio stones, and walked back to my car without looking at another single face at that table. I didn't cry until I was on the highway, windows down, the wind pulling the sound right out of my throat before anyone could hear it. I had no idea driving away that the real moment was still waiting for him. Sitting unopened on that table about to turn his Father's Day into something he would never forget. I was almost home somewhere past the county line when my phone started buzzing against the passenger seat over and over until I finally pulled into a gas station and looked at it. 11 missed calls from my mother. 3 from my brother Wesley. A voicemail from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be my Aunt Rosalind. Her voice shaking so badly I almost couldn't understand her at first. She kept saying my father had read the card and that he'd started screaming. screaming so loudly that the neighbors 2 yards over had come outside to see what was happening. Screaming so loudly that my mother had to ask my uncle to calm him down before someone called the police on their own family reunion. What none of them knew, what I hadn't told a single soul before that day, was what was actually inside that envelope. It wasn't just the watch receipt. 2 months earlier, my father had needed surgery on his hip. The kind that wasn't covered fully by his insurance, the kind that left a balance of almost $9,000 sitting on a hospital bill he never told the rest of the family about because he didn't want anyone thinking he couldn't handle his own affairs. I found out by accident, going through old mail at my mother's house while helping her organize files, and I quietly called the hospital myself, set up a payment plan under my name, and had been paying it off every month since, never saying a word to him about it. The card I left in that envelope wasn't just a Happy Father's Day note. It was a printed statement showing the balance, fully paid off, $0 owed, along with a short letter I had written explaining exactly what I'd done and why I hadn't told him. Because I didn't want credit. I just didn't want him to carry that weight alone. That was the part that broke him open in front of everyone. Not because he was ashamed of needing help, my aunt told me later, but because he realized in real time, surrounded by the very family he just humiliated me in front of, that the daughter he'd called a disgrace was the same daughter who had been quietly carrying a debt he hadn't told anyone about. He didn't scream out of anger at me. He screamed because the guilt hit him all at once, loud and physical. The kind of sound that comes out of a person when shame finally catches up to pride. My mother said he sat back down at that table and didn't speak for almost 10 minutes, just staring at the paper in his hands while everyone around him slowly understood what they had just stayed silent through. He called me that night. I almost didn't answer. When I finally did, his voice was different than I had ever heard it. Cracked and small in a way that didn't match the man who had stood at the head of that table hours earlier. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to explain away what he'd said. He just kept repeating that he didn't know. That he'd had no idea. That he was sorry. More sorry than he knew how to say out loud to a daughter he'd spent years measuring against a version of success he'd built in his own head. I let him talk. I didn't forgive him in that phone call. Not fully, because some wounds don't close just because someone finally sees them. But I listened because for the first time in my life, he was actually trying to see me. In the weeks since, things have started to shift slowly, awkwardly, the way real change usually does. He started calling just to ask how I'm doing, not to compare me to Wesley or my sister, just to talk. My mother told me he kept that printed statement in his wallet behind his license, like a reminder of how close he came to losing something he didn't even realize he had. I'm not writing this because I want sympathy. I'm writing it because I think a lot of people sitting at family tables right now know exactly what it feels like to be called the disgrace while everyone around them stays quiet. And I want them to know that staying calm, walking away with your head up can sometimes say more than screaming ever could. Sometimes the loudest response is the one you don't give at all. If this story meant something to you, if any part of it reminded you of your own family table, your own silence, your own envelope you never got to hand someone, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button before you go. I share stories like this one every single week, real raw, the kind that stay with you long after the video ends. And I'd love to have you back here for the next one. Thank you for listening to mine.